Hi, everybody. There's no better time to learn biology than right now. Good thing it's another biology with Miss Judd. Have you hugged a tree lately? If not, you might want to give it some thought because we owe a lot to our plants out there. Us and all other organisms need energy to fuel all of our growth, development, and reproduction. And if you remember from previous lessons, the sun is the ultimate source of energy. Now, unfortunately, we can't just go outside to grow, reproduce, and develop. Instead, that sunlight has to be converted into chemical energy that then we can use. And converting that sunlight into chemical energy happens through the process of photosynthesis. And you know who goes through photosynthesis? That tree I was talking about before. We owe a lot to them, so you might want to thank them. Today, we're going to be talking about energy and that process to which light energy is converted into chemical energy in the form of glucose or a sugar. So I'm going to send it up to Miss Judd in the corner to get us started.
Hello, everybody. Miss Judd in the corner here, and I'm excited to talk to you about energy and photosynthesis. Energy in the cellular world is the ability to do work. So we need energy to do things like move and breathe and eat. We have to, in order to do anything like even moving your finger like this, uses energy. Without the ability to obtain, which we use by eating or using energy, life would cease to exist. Think like our lungs are opening and closing as we breathe. If they could not do that, we would cease to exist. Now, the cellular energy that we'll be talking about is two currencies, glucose and ATP. Now, the main thing to think about here is that this glucose and this ATP are molecules. Inside these molecules are these bonds right here. The more bonds there are, the more energy is stored in this molecule. If you break a bond, that energy is released out. If you make a bond, you create and store energy in these bonds. Now, glucose is also known as sugar. This is a long-term storage of large amounts of energy. I know that it's large amounts of energy because look how many bonds there are in this molecule. That means a ton of energy is getting stored in this large molecule. Sugar is how we hold on to our energy for an extended amount of time. ATP is known as adenosine triphosphate. Tri means three. So this molecule has three phosphates. There is short-term storage and it releases small amounts of energy for the cells. There's not as many bonds. When ATP becomes ADP, a bond is broken, so energy is released, and that third phosphate drops. So ADP is diphosphate, di meaning two. So essentially, those three phosphates, one breaks down, it becomes two phosphates, ADP, and energy is released. And we can see this here. It's ADP, we add energy and a phosphate, and it becomes ATP, holding energy in those bonds. That bond is broken, so it releases energy and the phosphate. A good analogy for ATP is a rechargeable battery. A charged battery would be the ATP because it's holding that energy. When it releases that energy and becomes ADP plus a phosphate, it's a dead battery. And then you can recharge it to become ATP. In this lesson, we're going to talk about a couple other energy carriers, and I'm going to pop over to the other corner really quickly. NADP plus has no energy. NADPH carries energy. You lose a hydrogen when you release out energy, and then to recharge it, you gain a hydrogen. Again, you're adding more bonds, right? This is important when we talk about photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is when a plant collects sunlight, carbon dioxide, and water to create sugar, hint glucose, we just talked about it, and oxygen. This is happening in our plant cells. The big questions here: who goes through photosynthesis? Autotrophs, plants and plant-like protists. This is how they create their own food and energy. When does this happen? During the day. You need sunlight, so we have to do photosynthesis when there's sunlight. What is happening? You are converting energy from the sun into chemical energy stored in the bonds of carbohydrates, also known as sugar, also known as glucose. Where does this happen? Inside our plants, we have a specific organelle called a chloroplast. See your spotlight of an organelle to remind yourself what a chloroplast does. Let's dive into this a little bit more. This chloroplast has some really important elements to it. This chloroplast has some really important elements to it. You're going to draw this on the bottom of page. You have a very simple diagram here. Important here, we have these little green stacks. Each one of those stacks is called a thylakoid. Each disc is called a thylakoid. When they stack up, that's called a grana. Now, the space around these thylakoids stacked as grana is called the stroma. All of this is held inside a membrane, and that's our chloroplast. Please take a moment to draw this in your notes. Now, photosynthesis, what happens is we take sunlight, carbon dioxide, and water, and we make that into sugars and oxygen. So the first thing I want you to write are the words: sunlight, carbon dioxide, and water yields sugars and oxygen. We can remember that. That's something that we should have already learned. Now we can turn that into a chemical equation. Sunlight plus 6 CO2, 6 carbon dioxides, plus 6 H2O, 6 waters, yields C6H12O6. That's sugar. That's glucose. Plus 6 O2. This is how plants take sunlight and create something usable, glucose. The thing that absorbs the sunlight is called a pigment. It's a light-absorbing molecule. In plants, the main photosynthetic pigment is called chlorophyll. Chlorophyll absorbs red and blue light and reflects back green light. So from the sun are all the different shades of light in the spectrum, Roy G. Biv. The plant will absorb red and blue and bounce back green. This is why when we look at a plant, we see something green, because that's the light that's getting bounced back to our eyes. The steps of photosynthesis, we have first step, the light-dependent reactions. In the light-dependent reactions, energy from the sun is captured by chlorophyll molecules and converted into chemical energy, ATP and NADPH, those short-term energy carriers. What goes in is water and sunlight. What comes out is ATP, NADPH, and oxygen. This is happening in the thylakoid. Look back at your diagram. That's your little disc. This is happening in those discs. You have your chlorophyll that's absorbing the sunlight. You have water that's coming in order to create the short-term ATP and NADPH. Oxygen is just a byproduct. It gets released out. What this looks like is you have light, water coming in, recharging up those energy carriers to create ATP and NADPH. Oxygen is sent back out. The second step is the Calvin cycle, the light-independent reactions. In these cycles, ATP and NADPH, which just came from those light-dependent reactions, release their energy to turn 6 carbon dioxides into glucose. So we have ATP and NADPH coming in from the light reactions, carbon dioxides coming in, and those carbons, if you remember from our equation, we need 6 carbons to make glucose. Those get pushed together and stored those energies into that glucose molecule. This is happening in the stroma, so that outside space. What's released from this cycle is those dead, uncharged molecules, ADP, NADPH+. Those get sent back. And then glucose, that's what we're looking for. That's our goal, is getting that energy put into and stored long-term in glucose. What this looks like is we have carbon dioxide coming in, our charged molecules, ATP and NADPH. That energy gets stored with those carbons into that nice big energy storage molecule called sugar. And then what gets sent back is those now uncharged molecules, NADP plus and ADP. These molecules go back to the light reactions to get recharged with light and water. This diagram is in your notes. You need to know this diagram so that we can see how this light-dependent reaction and the Calvin cycle create photosynthesis. We are now going to practice, so make sure you complete your practice, and I'm going to send it back to Miss Judd.
Whew, that was a lot of new knowledge that we just had to put into our brains. As Ms. Judd in the corner said, please take the time to go over this again. Come back ready with your questions and to work with this material a little bit more next class. You guys are awesome. You're doing some great work. Don't forget to make good choices.